The freight train's whistle pierced the New Mexico desert air. Georg Gertner felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he crouched in the recreation hall's back corner. Around him, 500 German prisoners roared with laughter at cowboys galloping across the silver screen. Their voices echoed off the wooden walls of Camp Deming's movie theater, but Gertner's attention fixed on something else entirely. His eyes never left the clock mounted above the exit door. Each tick brought him closer to 8:47 p.m., the precise moment when everything would change. For 21 days, he had memorized every detail of that westbound freight train's schedule. Military precision guided his observations. The locomotive always slowed at the same curve, the same spot beyond the camp's wire perimeter. Tonight would be different from all those other nights of watching and waiting. While his fellow prisoners lost themselves in Hollywood fantasies, Gertner prepared for something far more dangerous than anything on screen. He was about to attempt what only 2,221 others among America's 425,171 Axis prisoners had dared: escape. His motivations ran deeper than simple homesickness or patriotic duty. Those drives had long since withered. Gertner was fleeing from something that terrified him more than any American prison camp. He was running from the prospect of returning home. The letter in his breast pocket had arrived 6 weeks earlier through international Red Cross channels. Paper that felt thin as tissue between his trembling fingers. Words that shattered everything he thought he knew about his future. Schweidnitz no longer existed as a German town. Soviet forces had awarded his homeland to Poland. The German population faced immediate expulsion, imprisonment, or execution. His family, his neighbors, everyone he had ever known faced catastrophe. For prisoners whose homes now lay trapped behind Stalin's Iron Curtain, American abundance represented more than comfort. It meant survival itself. As gunfire erupted from the movie screen, masking any sound he might make, Gertner began his desperate gamble. He slipped toward the hall's rear exit, every step calculated, every movement rehearsed. The distance to the perimeter fence measured exactly 200 yards across open desert. He had 90 seconds once the train's whistle sounded. 90 seconds to cover that ground. Board a moving freight train. Disappear into an America he had grown to love more than the homeland that no longer wanted him. The journey that led Georg Gertner to this desperate night began decades earlier in very different circumstances. December 18, 1920, brought his birth to a prosperous family in Schweidnitz's comfortable middle class. His father managed the local brewery with steady efficiency. Their home provided luxuries that would seem impossible by war's end. Schweidnitz sat nestled in Lower Silesia's textile country. The Sudeten Mountains cast long shadows over prosperous streets. Young Georg excelled at languages in the gymnasium. English and French flowed from his tongue with natural ease, skills that would prove more valuable than any military training he would later receive. September 1939 changed everything. War erupted across Europe's borders. 19-year-old Gertner enlisted in the Wehrmacht, swept along by nationalist fervor that promised to restore German greatness through conquest. His assignment to the 10th Panzer Division placed him at the spearhead of Hitler's lightning victories. France fell in just 6 weeks during spring 1940. Gertner's division raced through the Ardennes forests, reaching the English Channel ahead of schedule. These early triumphs seemed to validate everything Nazi propaganda had taught about German superiority and Allied weakness. By February 1941, circumstances carried him much farther from home. A transport ship bound for Tripoli, Libya awaited at Hamburg's docks. Gertner found himself joining Erwin Rommel's newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps. The Desert War would destroy his illusions about German invincibility. The Afrika Korps initially contained just 2 divisions facing the entire British Empire's resources. German soldiers rationed water to 1 liter daily, while temperatures soared past 120 degrees. Yet they captured British supply dumps filled with tinned peaches, chocolate, cigarettes, and rum. Luxuries that revealed their enemies' staggering material advantages. Desert warfare's mathematics told stories German propaganda couldn't hide. A single Tiger tank consumed 600 liters of fuel, traveling just 100 kilometers. The Afrika Korps' entire fuel allocation for March 1942 would have supplied Patton's Third Army for merely 3 days. German soldiers joked bitterly that Rommel's tactical genius meant winning battles with equipment held together by wire and determination. Gertner rose through the ranks to Unteroffizier Sergeant in the 164th Light Africa Division. His reconnaissance unit probed British defensive lines before major offensives. At El Alamein in October 1942, his men watched helplessly as Montgomery's forces unleashed artillery barrages from 1,000 guns, more firepower than the entire Afrika Korps possessed. British forces fired 15,000 shells in their opening bombardment alone. German artillery was rationed to 10 shells per gun daily. The retreat from El Alamein became a 1,400-mile death march across North Africa's burning sands. Gertner's unit abandoned vehicles for lack of fuel, destroyed equipment they couldn't carry, and watched the Luftwaffe vanish from African skies as Allied air superiority became absolute. By January 1943, the Afrika Korps was compressed into a shrinking pocket in Tunisia. American forces from Operation Torch had surrounded them completely. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin. Ammunition ran critically low. Hope disappeared entirely. May 1943 brought the end in an olive grove outside Tunis. Gertner's reconnaissance unit had been reduced from 120 men to just 17 survivors. They possessed no ammunition, no fuel, and no hope of rescue. British soldiers from the Eighth Army surrounded their position during the General Axis collapse that saw 275,000 German and Italian soldiers surrender within days. Gertner raised a white undershirt tied to a rifle barrel. The British soldiers seemed almost embarrassed by the surrender, immediately offering cigarettes and chocolate to enemies who looked more like scarecrows than the fearsome Afrika Korps of legend. The temporary prison camp outside Matur provided Gertner's first glimpse of American organizational efficiency. Within 48 hours, the U.S. Army had constructed a complete tent city housing 30,000 prisoners. Field hospitals, industrial kitchens, and sanitation facilities appeared with machine-like precision. Each prisoner was photographed, fingerprinted, and issued identification tags in assembly line fashion. The first psychological blow came with American rations. After months surviving on hard biscuits and sardines, prisoners received sea rations that American soldiers complained about constantly. Yet Germans saw these meals as incredible feasts. Canned beef, crackers, chocolate, coffee, and cigarettes arrived in quantities that seemed impossible. Gertner watched American guards casually discard half-eaten rations that would have sustained his reconnaissance unit for days. When he mentioned this incredible waste to a young guard, the GI from Iowa simply shrugged his shoulders. "Don't worry about it, Fritz. We got plenty more where that came from." The Liberty ship USS Samuel Huntington represented American industrial might in floating form. Built at California Shipbuilding Corporation in Wilmington in just 44 days, it was one of 2,710 identical vessels America would produce during the war. The ship's mess halls served fresh bread baked daily in onboard ovens, powdered eggs that actually tasted like real eggs, coffee so abundant that sailors poured leftover pots directly overboard. During the 14-day Atlantic crossing in July 1943, Gertner's English skills earned him a position assisting with prisoner administration. This role gave him access to the ship's bridge, where he observed radar equipment tracking vessels beyond the horizon, technology that Germany had barely begun developing. The ship's medical bay contained medicines German field hospitals hadn't seen since 1941. This included the new miracle drug penicillin that Americans distributed as casually as aspirin. Most disturbing was the crew's casual attitude toward their material wealth. Sailors threw away magazines after single readings. They discarded barely worn shoes without thought. Monthly wages exceeded what German officers earned annually, yet crewmen gambled these sums away nightly. When Gertner asked a boatswain's mate about such waste, the sailor laughed heartily. "Hell, Sarge, America makes more in a day than we can throw away in a month." July 24, 1943, brought the Samuel Huntington into Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. As they entered Hampton Roads, Gertner counted 47 cargo vessels, 12 destroyers, and 3 aircraft carriers in various stages of construction or repair. The Newport News shipbuilding yards stretched 3 miles along the James River. Cranes worked around the clock under blazing electric lights that turned night into day. The prisoners marched past parking lots containing hundreds of private automobiles belonging to shipyard workers. In Germany, private car ownership remained a fantasy for all but party elite. Here, welders and riveters drove their own vehicles to work daily. Signs advertised wages that seemed impossible to German eyes. Skilled workers earned 1.20 per hour when German workers made perhaps 50 Reichsmarks monthly. Nothing could have prepared Gertner for the train that would carry them inland. Instead of cattle cars used to transport German troops, prisoners boarded genuine Pullman coaches with cushioned seats, overhead luggage racks, and electric fans. The dining car served hot meals on actual ceramic plates with metal cutlery. Treatment superior to what German officers received on military trains. Air conditioning kept the cars comfortable despite July's oppressive heat. Technology that existed only in Hitler's personal railway car back in Germany. As the train rolled through Virginia's Tidewater region, Gertner pressed his face against cool window glass, witnessing an America that couldn't exist according to Nazi propaganda. Every small town blazed with electric lights at 10 p.m. Martinsville's Main Street displayed illuminated shop windows overflowing with merchandise. Roanoke's railway yards operated under banks of floodlights. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged cities into darkness since 1940. Here, light was so abundant, it was simply wasted. The train stopped for water and coal in Charlottesville. Prisoners watched American efficiency in action. Automated coal loaders filled the tender in 20 minutes, a job requiring 2 hours of manual labor in Germany. Railroad workers wore leather boots and denim overalls that would have cost German laborers 3 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles, casually tossing empties into recycling bins, treating as trash what would have been treasured in wartime Germany. As the train crossed into Tennessee, prisoners encountered American industrial power on a scale defying comprehension. Outside Kingsport, they passed the Tennessee Eastman Chemical Complex. Its cooling towers and distillation columns stretched for 2 miles. Through Kentucky's coal country, the train paralleled endless freight trains hauling coal from Appalachian mines. Gertner counted 147 cars in one coal train alone, each car carrying 100 tons, pulled by locomotives that dwarfed anything in Europe. Near Louisville, prisoners glimpsed the Rubber Town complex, where 4 massive synthetic rubber plants had risen from empty fields in 18 months. They produced 800,000 tons annually, using processes German chemists had invented, but never scaled to such magnitude. Germany, at its peak, managed barely 120,000 tons of production. The psychological impact accumulated with each mile westward. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River, while barges below carried more grain than Germany's entire 1942 harvest. Railway yards extended 8 miles along the riverfront. Grain elevators could store enough wheat to feed Munich for 5 years. Through Missouri's farmland, the train passed cornfields stretching beyond the horizon. Every farmhouse possessed electricity, running water, and at least one vehicle. Farmers operated combines costing more than Gertner's father earned in a lifetime. Yet these were ordinary people, not aristocracy or party members. After 4 days witnessing American abundance, the train arrived at Camp Hearn, Texas on July 28, 1943. Built in just 4 months on 840 acres outside the small town of Hearn, the camp would house up to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions exceeding what most had known as civilians. The barracks were wooden structures with electricity, flush toilets, and hot showers. They seemed palatial compared to Wehrmacht field accommodations. The camp's abundance manifested in ways that seemed deliberately cruel to men who knew their families faced starvation back home. Each prisoner received between 3,000 and 3,600 calories daily. Meat, vegetables, bread, butter, milk, and coffee arrived in quantities that German civilians, surviving on $1,000 to 1,250 calories, wouldn't see until 1948. Kitchen crews threw away more food daily than entire German villages consumed weekly. Gertner's assignment to the camp's administrative section proved invaluable due to his English skills. This position provided insights into American logistics that staggered him completely. Camp Hearn received weekly shipments of 40,000 pounds of beef, 20,000 loaves of bread, 15,000 gallons of milk, and literally tons of fresh vegetables. Prisoners built elaborate facilities using surplus materials Americans considered worthless scrap. They constructed a 3,000-seat amphitheater for theatrical performances. Sports complexes with soccer fields and swimming pools appeared. Decorative fountains rose using concrete and lumber that would have been precious resources in Germany. By September 1943, labor shortages forced America to employ POWs in agriculture and industry. Gertner's work crew was assigned to local cotton farms, traveling daily through Texas countryside without blindfolds or restricted routes. The first cotton farm belonged to Jim Morrison, who owned 2,000 acres outside Hearn. Morrison met the prisoners wearing denim overalls and driving a Ford truck, costing more than a German worker's lifetime earnings. His farm possessed 2 tractors, a combine harvester, and mechanical cotton pickers, machinery that replaced dozens of laborers. When Gertner expressed amazement, Morrison laughed easily. "Hell, Sergeant, I'm just a small farmer. You should see the big operations in California." Black and Mexican field hands, at the bottom of America's social hierarchy, ate lunches that would have been feasts in Germany. Thick sandwiches with meat and cheese, fresh fruit, thermoses filled with iced tea. They wore sturdy boots and cotton clothing. Many possessed radios and bicycles. Some even owned automobiles. When Gertner mentioned that such prosperity seemed impossible during wartime, a black foreman named Samuel Washington replied thoughtfully, "This ain't prosperity, Sergeant. This is just regular times. You should have seen the 20s. At a cotton gin outside Calvert, Gertner witnessed mechanical processing that defied German concepts of agricultural production. A single gin could process more cotton in one day than his entire home province could handle monthly. The GIN operated on electricity from the Rural Electrification Administration, part of a program that had brought electric power to 90% of Texas farms. Nothing shattered Nazi racial ideology more completely than Christmas 1943. American churches, civic organizations, and individual families sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, enemies who had been trying to kill American soldiers just months earlier. Each package contained cigarettes, candy, soap, razors, playing cards, and hand-knitted socks. At Camp Hearn, local Methodist and Baptist churches organized a joint Christmas service conducted in German. The choir, composed of Texas housewives whose sons and husbands were fighting overseas, sang Stille Nacht and O Tannenbaum, while German prisoners wept openly. Sunday school children had made hand-drawn Christmas cards with messages like, "Jesus loves you," and "Merry Christmas, Fritz." The Christmas feast defied comprehension for men who knew Germany faced starvation. Turkey, ham, stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, ice cream arrived in quantities that would have fed a German battalion for a week. Mess halls were decorated with electric lights, tinsel, and actual Christmas trees cut from East Texas forests. Gertner helped distribute mail that day. Red Cross packages from Germany revealed the homeland's growing desperation. German families sent letters written on scraps of paper, envelopes made from newspaper, stamps showing Hitler's increasingly haggard face. The contrast with American Christmas cards was stark. Thick paper, colorful printing, cheerful imagery provided silent testimony to two nations' divergent fortunes. By spring 1944, over 15,000 German POWs at camps across Texas were enrolled in educational programs. The U.S. Army, cooperating with American universities, provided correspondence courses, lectures, and vocational training. The University of Texas sent professors to Camp Hearn teaching American history, economics, and government. These scholars, including Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi persecution, taught without hatred or propaganda. Professor Ernst Goldschmidt, who had escaped Heidelberg in 1938, taught constitutional law to Wehrmacht officers who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler. His lack of vindictiveness astounded students who expected retribution. The camp library contained 20,000 books in German and English, plus subscriptions to dozens of American newspapers and magazines. Prisoners could read the New York Times, Time, Life, and the Saturday Evening Post. Multiple viewpoints on current events were available, something impossible in Nazi Germany, where all media followed rigid party lines. Vocational training prepared prisoners for post-war careers using equipment German trade schools couldn't obtain. The auto mechanics shop contained actual engines to disassemble, electrical systems to study, and diagnostic equipment surpassing anything in German technical colleges. Gertner enrolled in accounting courses, studying American business practices that revealed capitalism's actual function versus Nazi caricatures. Textbooks showed how corporations operated, how stocks and bonds worked, how ordinary Americans could invest savings and build wealth over time. Summer 1944 brought expanded POW labor programs as American production reached unprecedented peaks. Gertner's crew worked at a humble oil refinery outside Houston, witnessing petroleum processing on a scale explaining why German tanks ran out of fuel while American forces had unlimited supplies. The refinery processed 100,000 barrels daily, more than all Romanian oil fields that Germany desperately defended. The facility employed 5,000 workers across 3 shifts, including hundreds of women operating complex equipment. These Rosie the Riveters earned wages exceeding what German factory managers made. They drove their own cars to work, and wore clothing requiring impossible ration allocations in Germany. At the San Jacinto Ordnance Depot, prisoners unloaded ammunition shipments revealing American military production's terrifying scale. One daily shipment contained more artillery shells than a German division would fire monthly. The Houston Ship Channel handled more tonnage daily than Hamburg, Germany's largest port, managed weekly before the war. Most devastating psychologically was the waste. Americans discarded materials Germans would consider strategic resources. Empty oil drums were abandoned rather than cleaned and reused. Broken machinery was scrapped rather than repaired. This casual attitude toward material wealth revealed surplus so vast that efficiency became unnecessary. Throughout 1944, letters from Germany revealed increasing desperation, contrasting starkly with American plenty. Gertner's mother wrote on paper torn from ledgers, using pencil because ink was unavailable. She described surviving on starvation rations while his father's brewery had been destroyed by Allied bombing. D-Day news arrived on June 6, 1944, with guards excitedly sharing newspaper extras. The invasion's scale was staggering. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave alone. Organizational capability that rendered German resistance utterly futile. By autumn 1944, even fanatical Nazis among the prisoners grew quiet, as letters described cities without water or electricity. Old men and boys were being conscripted into the Volkssturm for final suicidal defense. April 1945 brought footage that shattered the last remnants of Nazi loyalty among prisoners. The U.S. Army required all POWs to watch films from liberated concentration camps. Many prisoners initially refused to believe the images. The evidence was overwhelming. Gertner watched hardened Afrika Korps veterans weep as they recognized the implications. They had fought for a regime committing unprecedented atrocities while they sat in American camps eating better than German civilians. The camp hospital reported a 400% increase in psychiatric cases during weeks following the screenings. VE Day on May 8, 1945, brought celebration to the camps, but dread to prisoners. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Maps showed Gertner's Silesian hometown now behind Soviet lines. Its German population faced expulsion, or worse. Summer 1945 brought systematic preparation for repatriation that filled prisoners with dread rather than anticipation. The U.S. government announced that all POWs would be returned to their exact places of origin, regardless of current political control. For 35,000 prisoners from territories now occupied by the Soviet Union or transferred to Poland, this meant almost certain death or deportation to Siberian labor camps. News filtered into camps about Operation Keelhaul, the forced repatriation of Soviet citizens who had fought with Germany. American and British troops had used violence forcing screaming Russians onto ships bound for the Soviet Union, where they faced execution, or the Gulag. Letters from recently repatriated prisoners confirmed the worst fears. Those returned to the Soviet zone faced immediate screening by the NKVD. Former POWs were considered contaminated by Western exposure. They were suspected of being American spies. Many disappeared into labor camps in the Urals or Siberia. For Georg Gertner, the decision to escape crystallized in August 1945 when he received final confirmation that Schweidnitz had been transferred to Polish administration. The entire German population faced immediate expulsion from their ancestral homes. His job in camp administration gave him access to repatriation schedules. He learned his group was scheduled for shipment to Fort Eustis, Virginia, in October. Then by Liberty ship to Bremerhaven. Finally, by train to Silesia, directly into the hands of Soviet or Polish authorities. The thought filled him with terror greater than any battlefield experience. Gertner studied escape with methodical Wehrmacht planning. He observed guard rotations carefully. He memorized train schedules precisely. He saved portions of his POW wages, 80 cents daily that could be exchanged for American cash. He practiced his English accent obsessively, perfecting an identity as Peter Peterson, a Norwegian immigrant who had lost his papers. On September 21, 1945, conditions aligned perfectly for his desperate gamble. The Western film San Antonio drew massive attendance, leaving minimal guards on duty throughout the camp. A new moon provided maximum darkness for movement. Gertner had accumulated $25 in cash, enough for basic survival in the American economy he had studied so carefully. At 8:30 p.m., as gunfire erupted from the movie screen, Gertner slipped out of the recreation hall's rear exit. Moving in a low crouch across desert scrub, he reached the inner fence in 90 seconds exactly. After confirming no patrols approached his position, he crawled under the outer fence and sprinted across open desert as the freight train approached the curve. The train's headlight appeared around the bend, moving faster than he had anticipated during weeks of observation. Gertner ran parallel to the tracks as the locomotive passed, grabbed the ladder of a boxcar, and hauled himself aboard while the train was still moving at 15 miles per hour. Collapsing inside the empty boxcar, Gertner listened for pursuit sirens that never came. By the time evening count occurred at 10 p.m., the train would be 30 miles away, heading west toward El Paso and freedom he had dreamed about for months. The freight train deposited Gertner in El Paso as dawn broke on September 22nd. At the El Paso YMCA, he rented a room for 50 cents. The desk clerk, a veteran missing his left arm, studied him carefully but said nothing suspicious. War had created many men with incomplete stories and missing documentation. The YMCA's reading room contained newspapers revealing the search's intensity. The El Paso Herald-Post reported military police checking trains and bus stations for an escaped German POW. The FBI had been notified officially. A $50 reward was offered for information leading to capture. At a second-hand store, Gertner traded his distinctive jacket for work clothes. Denim overalls, cotton shirt, worn boots that transformed him into one of thousands of migrant laborers moving through the Southwest. Instead of buying a traceable bus ticket, he joined Mexican laborers waiting for farm trucks recruiting cotton pickers. He climbed aboard with dozens of others heading north toward Las Cruces. The cotton fields outside Las Cruces provided perfect cover for a fugitive. Farm owners asked no questions beyond, "Can you work?" Payment was cash daily, with no documentation required. Gertner picked cotton from sunrise to sunset, earning $3 daily. More than German laborers made in a week back home. The migrant camp revealed American abundance even at poverty's edge. Workers lived in tents, but ate better than German middle-class families. A traveling store sold canned goods, cigarettes, and cold Coca-Cola from ice-filled coolers. Even transient laborers possessed radios and guitars for evening entertainment. Among the Mexican workers, Gertner perfected his cover story carefully. Peter Peterson had emigrated from Norway before the war. He lost his papers in a California boarding house fire. He had drifted into agricultural work like thousands of displaced persons. Fellow workers, many undocumented themselves, accepted the fiction without question or suspicion. After 3 months in Las Cruces, Gertner had saved $200. Enough to risk moving to California where opportunities were greater. He bought a bus ticket to Fresno, traveling at night to avoid checkpoints and questioning by authorities who might recognize him from wanted posters. January 1946 found Gertner in California's Central Valley, working at the Giacomacchi Ranch outside Hanford. The owner, Tony Giacomacchi, was a second-generation Italian-American whose parents had built an agricultural empire through hard work and opportunity. He paid fair wages, provided decent housing, and asked no questions about workers' backgrounds. By summer 1946, Peter Peterson needed to disappear permanently. FBI wanted posters still appeared in post offices throughout the Southwest. Norwegian Americans were returning from visiting liberated Norway with stories that could expose his fictional background. Gertner decided on complete reinvention, adopting the name Dennis F. Wiles from an Arkansas migrant family he had befriended during harvest season. The new Dennis Wiles had been orphaned at age 7, raised in state institutions, with no family or connections to verify his constructed history. Creating documentation proved surprisingly easy in post-war America's bureaucratic chaos. Within months, Dennis F. Wiles existed officially, complete with birth certificate, Social Security card, and driver's license. Winter 1947 brought Gertner to California's Sierra Nevada mountains. At Sugar Bowl near Lake Tahoe, his alpine skiing skills earned immediate employment. Teaching wealthy Americans to ski provided income and social cover, exceeding his dreams during those desperate months of agricultural labor. He earned $300 monthly plus tips that often doubled his salary. Wealthy clients treated him with respect and generosity impossible to imagine in Nazi Germany's rigid class system. The contrast with Germany's post-war destruction haunted him constantly. While he taught starlets on perfectly groomed slopes, letters through Red Cross channels revealed his family's suffering. His parents had survived expulsion from Silesia but lived in a refugee camp outside Frankfurt. They subsisted on Allied relief supplies while he prospered in American luxury. Yet Gertner couldn't risk helping them, convinced they were better off believing him dead than knowing he had abandoned them for American prosperity. At Sugar Bowl, he met Mary Patterson, a ski enthusiast from a wealthy San Francisco family. Their romance developed over shared runs down pristine slopes, while Europe struggled through the harsh winter of 1947. She knew him only as Dennis Wiles, the charming ski instructor with the mysterious past. January 13, 1952, transformed Dennis Wiles from anonymous ski instructor to momentary celebrity. The Southern Pacific's luxury train, City of San Francisco, became trapped in a blizzard at Yuba Pass, stranding 226 passengers in sub-zero temperatures. Gertner, working as a ski instructor in nearby Northern California, joined the rescue effort that mobilized over the 3-day ordeal. His Africa Corps survival training proved invaluable as he helped guide civilians to safety through deep snow and howling winds. When the train was finally reached on January 16th, Life magazine photographed the rescue teams. The images included a shot of Dennis Wiles among the heroic rescuers. The photographs appeared nationwide in magazines and newspapers. The escaped POW was unrecognized as part of the American rescue effort. The irony wasn't lost on Gertner. His photograph appeared in publications that also contained FBI wanted posters seeking him. Yet no one made the connection between past and present. The clean-shaven ski instructor bore little resemblance to the gaunt POW photographed in 1943. Success had transformed his appearance as completely as his identity. Moving to warmer climates in 1954, Gertner settled in La Jolla, California, where his athletic skills translated to tennis instruction at exclusive clubs. He earned $500 monthly teaching actors and business executives on manicured courts overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Frustrated by wooden rackets' limitations, Gertner developed an aluminum-framed design that was lighter and stronger than traditional wood construction. He called it the Dennis racket, but couldn't patent it without risking background investigations. When René Lacoste and others later commercialized similar aluminum racket designs, Gertner watched others profit from innovations he had pioneered but couldn't claim. The price of his deception included lost opportunities for legitimate success. At the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club, he met Joan Clark, a widow with 2 young children. Their relationship developed slowly, built on genuine affection rather than desperate passion. Both had experienced loss and valued stability above romance. On June 15, 1964, Dennis F. Wiles married Joan Clark in Las Vegas. Gertner had now lived in America longer than in Germany, constructing a fictional history that felt more real than his actual past. Joan accepted Dennis's explanation that his parents had died young. That institutional upbringing left him without family connections or documentation. Her children called him Dad, never suspecting their stepfather had commanded soldiers in Hitler's army or witnessed the Afrika Korps' desert campaigns. The family moved to Hawaii in 1966, where Gertner worked as a construction estimator for military projects. Hawaii's multicultural environment provided perfect camouflage among populations where everyone had come from somewhere else. His accent was just one among dozens in the island's melting pot. By 1984, the weight of constant deception had become unbearable. When Joan suggested a European vacation to celebrate their 20th anniversary, Gertner knew the masquerade had to end. He couldn't obtain a passport without triggering investigations that would unravel 40 years of careful lies. On a humid August evening in Honolulu, Gertner finally told Joan the truth about everything. He was not Dennis Wiles, but Georg Gertner, not an orphan, but a son who had abandoned his family. Not a simple ski instructor, but an escaped prisoner of war who had been living under false identity for 4 decades. Joan's reaction cycled through disbelief, anger, and devastating betrayal. 20 years of marriage had been built on fundamental deception about the most basic facts of his identity. They separated in 1985, though remaining legally married since divorce would require documentation. Dennis Wiles couldn't provide without exposing his true identity. Arnold Kramer's 1979 book, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, mentioned the 7 POWs who remained unaccounted for after the war. Georg Gertner was listed among them. Through intermediaries, Gertner contacted Kramer, proposing to tell his complete story in exchange for negotiated surrender terms with federal authorities. On September 11, 1985, exactly 40 years after his escape from Camp Deming, Georg Gertner surrendered on NBC's Today Show. Bryant Gumbel interviewed him as millions of Americans watched the last escaped Nazi POW end 4 decades of flight from his past. The government's response reflected bureaucratic confusion about his unique status. The FBI declared no interest in prosecuting a 65-year-old man for a 40-year-old escape from a prison camp. The Immigration and Naturalization Service couldn't determine his legal status under existing law. He wasn't technically an illegal immigrant, since America had brought him here as a prisoner. He wasn't deportable since the Germany he knew no longer existed as a political entity. The legal proceedings dragged through years of hearings and bureaucratic reviews. In 1990, special congressional legislation granted Gertner permanent resident status. He had to wait until November 2009 to finally become an American citizen at age 88 in Denver. The ceremony was conducted by the same federal judge who had overseen his legal case for 2 decades. Gertner spent his final years in Colorado, living quietly in Loveland. Joan had divorced him officially once his legal status was resolved, but they maintained cordial relations. He gave occasional interviews to historians and journalists, expressing gratitude for American generosity and regret for the deception it had necessitated. His story became part of the historical record he had tried so hard to escape. In 2012, Gertner returned to Germany for the final time, visiting his sister in Hamburg. The prosperous modern nation bore no resemblance to the destroyed country he had fled in his imagination for so many decades. Recovery had exceeded even American abundance in some respects. Georg Gertner died on January 30, 2013, in Loveland, Colorado, at age 92. His death certificate listed both names, Georg Gertner and Dennis F. Wiles, acknowledging the dual identity he had carried for 67 years. Local newspapers noted the passing of the last German POW to escape American captivity. Gertner's extraordinary story transcends individual escape to illuminate profound historical forces that shaped the post-war world. That only 2,222 of 425,871 Axis POWs attempted escape, a mere 0.52% rate, testifies to the psychological impact of witnessing American prosperity while knowing their homelands faced devastation. These prisoners experienced an America that Nazi propaganda had declared impossible, a nation fighting a global war while maintaining civilian abundance exceeding pre-war German prosperity. The contrast destroyed ideological foundations more effectively than any re-education program could have managed. The camp experience created an unexpected dynamic that would influence post-war reconstruction. German POWs lived better in American captivity than they had as free soldiers or civilians. They received triple the calories of German civilians while enjoying educational opportunities, recreational facilities, and medical care superior to what they had known at home. For most prisoners, this experience created profound transformation. They returned to Germany as unwitting ambassadors for democratic values and American methods. Their testimony helped build the Federal Republic along American lines rather than Soviet models. They had witnessed capitalism's productive capacity firsthand. But for Gertner and a handful like Kurt Rossmeisel, who escaped from Camp Butner and lived as Frank Ellis for 14 years, the contrast was too extreme to bridge. The gap between American abundance and European destruction seemed unbridgeable through any conceivable reconstruction effort. The statistics of German POW management reveal one of history's most successful captivity programs. Of 371,783 German POWs held in America, 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent in post-war surveys. Only 7 prisoners remained permanently unaccounted for after repatriation programs ended. Gertner was the last after Rossmeisel's surrender in 1959. 0 American civilians were killed by escaped POWs, despite minimal security at many camps. Approximately 5,000 former prisoners emigrated to America legally after 1950, testament to the positive impression their captivity had created. The contrast with Soviet treatment was stark and deliberate. Of 3 million German POWs held by the USSR, approximately 1 million died in captivity from starvation, disease, and execution. Survivors weren't released until 1955, and many never returned home at all. American camps became inadvertent classrooms in capitalist democracy. Prisoners learned that reconstruction was possible because they had witnessed abundance created through production rather than conquest. They saw prosperity shared broadly rather than concentrated among political elites. Georg Gertner died having lived 2 complete lives with remarkable success. One as a German soldier serving a criminal regime in a losing cause. Another as an American citizen embodying immigrant success and assimilation. His escape was motivated by the fundamental human desire for a better life, after witnessing American abundance that made returning to Soviet-occupied ruins seem like volunteering for certain death. America's treatment of German POWs represented soft power at its most effective level. By treating enemies with dignity and demonstrating democratic values through daily action rather than propaganda, America converted adversaries into lifelong allies. The investment in prisoner welfare paid dividends for decades. Yet Gertner's story also reveals transformation's hidden costs that extended far beyond his personal sacrifice. Parents died believing their son was dead. His sister mourned unnecessarily for decades. His American wife discovered that their entire marriage was built on fundamental deception about his identity and past. The last German soldier in America died as he had lived for 4 decades, as an American citizen in good standing. His transformation from Africa Corps sergeant to Colorado retiree encompassed the entire arc of post-war German-American reconciliation and alliance building. His gravestone in Loveland bears no mention of his extraordinary history or the remarkable journey from enemy prisoner to American citizen. But his story endures in historical archives as testament to prosperity's power to transform enemies into friends through generous treatment and genuine opportunity. The German POW, who was so impressed by American abundance that he escaped to avoid going home, had found exactly what he sought during those desperate months planning his flight from Camp Deming. Not just material comfort, but freedom to become someone entirely new without interference from authorities or society. Gertner died as Dennis F. Wiles, having chosen America so definitively that America finally chose him through citizenship and acceptance. His escape was complete in ways he never could have imagined that night in September 1945. He had run not just from a prison camp in New Mexico, but from history itself. He found refuge in a nation wealthy enough to forget his past and generous enough to grant him an American future. His story remains a unique chapter in the complex relationship between former enemies who became the strongest of allies through mutual respect and shared prosperity.